everyone, and welcome back to the Cabral Concept. I'm Stephen Cabral, board-certified naturopathic doctor, and today I have with me here Dr. Sara Gottfried. Dr. Sara Gottfried, MD, is a Harvard-educated physician, speaker, and author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, including her most recent book, Younger, a breakthrough program to reset your genes, reverse aging, and turn back the clock 10 years. Dr. Sara teaches men and women how to balance their hormones naturally and slow down the aging process through the application of functional medicine. She lives in Berkeley, California. I'm a little jealous about that. And her husband, daughters, and with her husband, daughter, and puppies. Learn more about Dr. Sara at Sara Gottfried, MD. And of course, I will link up everything today in our show notes. So thank you, Dr. Sara, for being here today. We're very lucky to have you on our call, podcast, and video today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. I'm also holding Dr. Sara's new book, Younger, and I did want to congratulate you before we got started because you did hit the New York Times bestseller list again. I think this is your 3rd time. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, and so it's an amazing honor to be able to achieve that, and obviously it shows that you have an audience that really does appreciate your work and the education that you're doing. So I'm really hoping that our listeners can benefit a lot from you today.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to get right into the questions. We're going to spend about 30 minutes today going through what I think, out of this, 300-page book or so, what's the most pertinent? Like, what can people get the most out of? What are those action steps? But of course, we can't do this book justice all in 30 minutes. So I'll obviously link to that. And of course, like any book, we can find it on Amazon, but maybe there's a few bonuses that we can send people to as well. So the first question that I had for you is, and we were just chatted a little bit before the call, but I was always saying that anybody who gets into natural health or functional medicine or whatever we want to call it now, we typically have, we have our own journey. We have our own story that got us into this. Do you have one of your own that you could share with our listeners?
Definitely. I always had an interest in natural healing. I had a great-grandmother who was a whole foodist. She practiced yoga every day, and she would show up at our house in suburban Maryland with suitcases of kale and Meyer lemons. She lived in Palo Alto, California. So I grew up with natural medicine, but it wasn't until a breaking point in my 30s. And this is, I think, what you're describing that other natural practitioners have. We all kind of hit a wall in one way or another. And I apologize for my voice. My book tour has kind of thrashed it a bit, so hopefully you can understand me. But what happened in my 30s was that I had 2 kids. I was married. My husband traveled a lot. I was working as a conventional OBGYN. So I was delivering babies at night and doing hysterectomies by day. And I just was fat, frumpy, frazzled, felt way too young to feel so old. And so this was around age 35 when I realized that conventional medicine didn't have answers for me. So I went to my doctor and I said, here are my symptoms. I've got PMS. I don't want to have sex with my husband. I can't lose the baby weight. I'm struggling way more than I think I should be. I'm stressed out. What do you have for me? And I still remember this. He said, well, how about an antidepressant? And then he also offered a birth control pill because in conventional medicine, that fixes every hormonal problem. And then third, he went to his whiteboard. And I still remember, I was kind of shivering in one of those paper gowns as he wrote on his whiteboard, exercise more plus eat less equals thinner Sara. And at first I was so humiliated when he offered these things, but then I got angry. Mm-hmm. And I left his office and went straight to the lab because I had a hunch that my problem was hormonal. I had a hunch that what he was offering to mask my symptoms, like an antidepressant and birth control pill and more exercise, just wouldn't hit the mark. So I went to the lab. My cortisol was 3 times what it should have been. I had estrogen dominance. My thyroid was sluggish. And when I addressed those problems, it really started to change everything. So that's really the way that I got into natural medicine.
I think that right there is an amazing story on many levels. And one thing I want to touch on, which not a lot of people do, is that they let their PCP or whoever it might be, again, it's not always like you and I would never say that every conventional medicine doctor doesn't have your best interest at heart. Even when they give poor advice, they're trying to do it to help you. It's not like it's, a mean-spirited thing. Although, of course, I've met a few over my time, but that goes with any profession in the world. So the interesting thing is that a lot of people, they take their PCP's advice or words as gospel, and that's it. And I think that's where we can start to, if there's one good movement, it's just with the internet, there's more information. So you could say, is there any alternative? Now, the reason I don't like the internet is because you can read an article on anything and doesn't go deep, right? So it's all surface level. So we think we can get the answer by taking this one supplement. And I've never seen one supplement, even B12, which we all like to talk about, as never the thing, or turmeric. But what you did was you actually said, you know what? This doesn't sound right to me. And you got angry. And I like that anger because anger doesn't allow for depression, right? Depression is depressed. But when you get angry, you almost fight against that for a period of time, enough of a time just to be able to take that next step. And I think that's all people need to hear is like, what's my next step? Okay, you're not a doctor. You don't know about cortisol, but there's amazing nutritionists and there's other amazing doctors and practitioners and whoever it might be that can start to then take you on that next step. And one other thing is that no one ever gets better within the next week. Like, that's not how it works. And I'm sure you didn't get better the next week. You learned something, you tried and failed, you took the next step, but you knew more, and you started to move down that path. Is that kind of how it was?
That's exactly how it was. And I agree with you. I think righteous anger is so powerful. Sometimes that's the power that we start with. And then as you start trying different forms of natural healing and you start to feel better, and your energy comes back, and that starts to kind of fuel you to go forward and to keep your curiosity and to learn new things and to understand what's true for your body. That's what leads to transformation. And it's not like some big aha moment that happens in 24 hours. It's the steady baby steps over time that add up to major transformation.
I completely agree. And I think that's, one of the big takeaways it should be right now is that you might get discouraged if you believe that if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you have an issue with your metabolism, meaning like you look at food literally and you start to gain weight or retain water or whatever it might be, and your friends get to go out and they get to have pizza or whatever it might be. There's going to be an answer, but your path might not be just super straightforward. And so I think that's a really nice thing. But again, we always talk about there's hope for everyone. There really is. And we're going to talk about genetics next. So what I'd like to say is, some of us do start a little further behind in terms of genetics, or maybe just have one little strike against us. And I like to say, we can all point to the people who, because they didn't wear a seatbelt in a car accident, that's like the 1 out of a million that they survived. Or there's this one person they know who drinks 2 scotches every night, can smoke and eat whatever they want, and that person lived to be 85 or whatever it might be. There's always going to be those people. But for a lot of us, and we're looking at about a third of the people right now with the MTHFR-based gene mutation, maybe more down the line as well. Apologize about the ambulances, fire trucks, and everything in the background. This is downtown Boston.
This is urban living.
Very, very urban. So what we have, though, is we have a lot of people who are now inheriting genes from the last 100, 200 years where there's been more pollution, there's been more toxicity, there's been more to be able to mutate and change DNA. Can you just tell us like a little bit about how our genetics affect the outcome in life and if we're destined to live by our genetics or if we can do anything about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is, I think, the most exciting part of the new science. And I think the direction that we're heading in medicine. So I think in the next 10 to 20 years, medicine's going to be much more personalized, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So when I went to Harvard Medical School, which was a while ago, I was in Boston from 1989 to 1994. I was taught that your genetics are your destiny. We didn't know as much about epigenetics, which is the way that your DNA is expressed. We didn't know as much about how you can turn on and off certain genes with your environment, much of which is under your control. So to me, this creates this sacred opportunity, kind of this ability to choose the genes that maybe are starting to work against you. You mentioned a woman, for instance, with Hashimoto's who can't lose weight. She's struggling metabolically. She can't, she does the things that her friend does, the 5-2 diet, for instance, and it just doesn't work. And it turns out that there are genes that can program you to survive a famine. I have many of them. I have about a few dozen. I'm half Irish, half Polish, so I have these genes that would allow me to survive without food, to bank fat no matter what. And now in times of plenty, I'm still banking the fat. So I have to turn certain genes off and certain genes on to fit into the clothes in my closet. So that's the promise of epigenetics. Another way to think about it is that you have your genotype. That's your set of DNA. We have about 24,000 genes. We won't talk about all of them today.
Not all.
And then you have a set of traits that kind of make up what you look like and your biochemistry. And that set of traits is the way that your DNA interacts with the environment. And even more important, just to kind of connect back to Harvard Medical School, only about 10% of your risk of disease is determined by genetics. 90% is determined by environment. 90%. So that is an incredible opportunity that all of us should be taking.
And I think that right there, really says it too, that you are in control of your destiny for the most part. There are some congenital-based issues, some genetic issues that do present themselves earlier in life, but I've even seen those be able to be corrected too. And I do agree. And I spoke about this on a previous podcast, but this is such an important time right now in 2017, because I honestly believe that if you can keep yourself healthy for the next 15 to 20 years, what they're doing right now with stem cells, whether you believe in stem cells or not, they're looking at an average of a 10 to 12 year increase in lifespan, healthy lifespan, using stem cell based therapy. And that's just the beginning. A few colleagues in San Francisco actually who are big into the genetic based lab testing, which we work with, they're looking at gene editing in about 20 to 30 years. And so when we're talking about all these different things that may be wrong, well, we might be able to selectively change some of those specific genes. Now, that doesn't do a lot for us right now today. So what we have to do now is we have to learn about our genes. Yes, you can absolutely get your genetics tested, and we can link up to different things like that. You can maybe give some of your favorites as well. But it's so powerful. One of the best things I think about gene testing as well is that you honestly, yes, you can do it in the future, maybe when we have more data, but you only have to do it once. And if you do a really good lab, I'm not an advocate of 23andMe. That's just me, because I don't think it's enough data. I think it's fun. I think it's nice. It's a place to get started. It's kind of like Curves Gym, I always say, great place to get started. You just don't want to be there in a decade from now. You want to have graduated.
That's good.
So there's a lot, when I look at my genes, and I want you to talk about yours as well and what we've kind of done about them, there's a few genes and SNPs. So one of them is an MR gene. And it doesn't force me, but what happens is when my body gets revved up with stress, I overproduce ACTH. And basically my HPA axis turns on to such a high degree that I have a hard time coming back down. Now, yes, as a child, that made me very high-tempered, but because, again, you can do a lot with that, and I have. But at the same time, I can't even break down those metabolites as quickly. And what it does to my nervous system, it burns out the nervous system just, at a basic level, which affects everything else in your body, right? So if you're in sympathetic nervous system dominance in fight or flight, what does that do to gut function? What does that do to all the other basic detoxification? So let's talk about what about obesity? What about Hashimoto's? What are some of the things that can be done from an environmental standpoint, diet, exercise, that might be a couple things to switch those off?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've got a number of obesity genes. I'm basically programmed to be a 200-pound diabetic with thinning hair. And so I don't want to be not ideal. So I am quite familiar with the obesity genes in particular. One of the most common obesity genes that has the greatest impact on your weight is called FTO. You can think of it as the fatso gene. So this gene is a nutrient sensor, and people who have a problem with this gene, like I do, who have a variant, are generally higher in body mass index. And there's a couple of different ways that you can regulate this gene. One is by reducing your carbohydrates, not so low that you affect adrenal and thyroid function, but really thinking about your carbohydrate thresholds so that you are getting enough carbohydrates to keep your body healthy, but not so much that you are gaining weight. Sure. So carbohydrates become really important with FTO. Another way to manage this particular nutrient sensor is to make sure that you get plenty of fiber. So I know you and I are very similar in what we recommend, tons of fresh vegetables. I'm a big fan of non-starchy vegetables, especially for people who are trying to lose weight, so that I generally eat about 2 pounds of vegetables a day. And that may sound like an enormous quantity, but when you break it up over 3 meals, it's actually not that much.
Sure.
So that's what I find is really effective for the FTO gene. And this gene, I'll say one other quick thing about it. The Amish have a really high rate of this gene. They have a high prevalence of the FTO gene. And you don't think of the Amish as being overweight.
Right.
And the reason is they have 4 to 6 hours of hard labor every day. So I'm not recommending that as a way of managing this gene, but it turns out that 30 minutes of moderate exercise is a way of regulating this gene so that it works for you instead of against you. So those are 3 strategies that you can use to regulate your FTO gene.
Excellent. And then what about types of vegetables? You said non-starchy. Should people be looking to have 1 or 2 cups of a sulfur-based vegetable, cruciferous vegetable? Does that seem to help with maybe estrogen dominance or other things that can play into it, inflammation-based phase 2 detoxification? Or is it just get a rainbow of colors for your vegetables? What's your recommendation there?
Well, I definitely like the cruciferous vegetables. Like you, I take care of mostly women, and there's pretty much no downside to eating cruciferous vegetables. For people who have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we have to be a little careful. And for people who have thyroid conditions, I still think that the benefits outweigh the risks in terms of the goitrogenic effects of cruciferous vegetables. But, another important factor here is the microbiome. So the set of DNA from the microbes that are in your body. And we know that there's a subset of your microbiome that modulates your estrogen levels. And we know that cruciferous vegetables, and especially fiber, can really help you modulate your estrobolome. That's what it's called. So it regulates your estrogen levels. And I think crucifers are so important for modulating your estrobolome. Now, for people who don't pay any attention to their estrobolome, they have higher estrogen levels, more estrogen dominance, and a greater risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and in men, prostate cancer. Right. So this is one of those things that we want to be taking care of.
So really, no matter what, it's a great tip for most people to get in as many vegetables, obviously, as they can, but also try to get in some of the Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, some of the cruciferous-based ones, because like you said, there's no real downside. We work with so many people in our practice with SIBO, and I'm sure you do as well, or Crohn's, colitis, you name it. But it's really, no matter what, hopefully that person's well within 12 weeks or so. And then you're going to start to rebuild that gut microbiome from there. And because of Firmicutes, and I'm sure you talk about this as well, and Bacteroides, 2 of my favorite words for the gut microbiome, and dealing directly with obesity. And so it's kind of like, we look at the genes, and I think that you may agree on this as well, is nothing works in isolation, right? So you're looking at the bacteria and how that works with hormone levels and how it works with stress, and exercise obviously helps modulate all of those as well.
For sure. And I think if you ask 1,000 nutritionists about, what's the perfect food plan, you get so many different answers. And I think that's really confusing for people. But there is total agreement about vegetables. There's just total agreement. Eggs, yes, that's 500 on one side, 500 on the other. But when it comes to vegetables, it's just really clear that the nutrients are so important for your DNA. And the way I think about food, I used to think about it as entertainment, fuel. Now I think of it as information for your DNA. So the DNA of your own cells, your human cells, but also for your microbiome.
I haven't heard that before. I think that's excellent. And so you can look at it with everything, but also, this is information. That's an interesting way to look at it because we are part of nature. And I think as humans, we forget that. Like we're taking in nature and we are a part of that. We're not isolated from it. And I think that and looking at your rhythms, right? So with light during the day and dark at night, trying to get within that with sleep all plays a big factor. And I'd like to talk about a few of those things next. So I just kind of, earmarked one of my pages, and that was the 10 conditions that steal your youth. So I'd like to just, if I could, read them off, and you could maybe talk a little bit more about those, just because I'm sure you have them memorized, but not directly in front of you. But we're talking about a word that I like that you talk about in your book, which is called inflammaging, and how some of these things can cause inflammation, which then lead to advanced aging or speeding up the aging process. So number 1 was, and I don't think they're probably in any particular order, but getting fat, sitting too much, taking certain medications, and I'll let you talk about those, maybe which ones as well that have been shown to cause or potentiate the cause for Alzheimer's and other things as well. Eating too many carbs and processed foods, losing muscle, sleeping less, lacking vision and purpose, getting insufficient vitamin D, feeling stressed out, and isolated socially. So maybe you could just, these seem really lifestyle based, and what effect do the sum of all these 10 things really have in store for us?
Well, these age you way too fast. And part of the way I came up with this list was to look at my own life and to look at some of the things I was doing wrong, because I did a telomere test. Do you test your patients' telomeres? Is that something you have in your practice?
We do offer it. There's not a lot of people who actually take advantage of that test because it can be scary. It really can. Yeah. You don't want to be a 40-year-old with 70-year-old telomeres or whatever it might be.
Yeah, well, that was my story. So when I was 44, it was shortly after Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF got the Nobel Prize for her work on telomeres, and she did something very interesting. She looked at moms in San Francisco. So her focus was premenopausal moms in their 30s and 40s, much of which I had in my own medical practice at the time. And she looked at moms who had a sick kid in the intensive care unit, and she compared them to moms who had a healthy kid. And what she found was that it didn't matter if your kid was sick. What mattered was your perception of stress. And a light bulb totally went off for me. When I heard about this, I thought, oh my gosh, my perception of stress, even with all the work I've done on cortisol, still needs some adjustment. I think I want to start testing my own patients for their telomeres. But first, let me test myself. And so I tested myself at age 44. This simple blood test showed that I had the telomeres of a 64-year-old woman. So that's what got me into action, and to look at, okay, what are the levers that are making me age so fast, and what is under my control? How can I modulate some of these? So I definitely had an increase in my fat mass that happened before age 44. This was even while being a runner and going to yoga. I'm a yoga teacher, so I do yoga regularly. But I didn't maintain my muscle mass, with kind of focus and precision. So what happens starting between 35 and 40, especially for women, is that your fat mass starts to increase and your muscle mass starts to decrease. And it's significant. It's about 5 pounds per decade starting at age 40. That's a lot. And it starts to create kind of more of a frat party in your body, because fat is not inert. It doesn't just sit there. It's full of toxins. It creates cytokines, these chemical messengers that can wreak havoc and create inflammation in the body. So getting fat was definitely a big one for me. I wasn't taking any of these medications, but some of the medications that can increase your risk of Alzheimer's disease include anxiety pills and also antihistamines like Benadryl. So this is important because I feel like with so many of the symptoms that people have, men or women, of anxiety or depression, we're often treating them with the wrong things. I think often it's hormonal issues that are at the root of it, and we need to address those first. So another thing that I think is important, I don't like to give a one-size-fits-all with food. I like to give guidelines and have people do the N of 1 experiment so that they can really figure out what's true for them. So when it comes to too many carbohydrates or, not enough protein and losing muscle mass, the way I think about it is that you want to make sure your carb threshold is below the level at which you gain weight, and your protein threshold is high enough so that you can maintain your muscle mass. Sure. So I like to think about it more in terms of fat composition and lean body mass than a number on a scale.
We preach the same exact thing. We often go lower carb, lower carb, lower carb, and then we increase. So we look at fat weight basically lost by body composition, and then increase. We actually want as many carbs as a person can handle, like within reason, obviously. Because right now the big craze is keto, but it honestly, for the majority of people, as a long-term health solution, probably not a great idea. But can
I say one quick thing about that?
Yes,
because my husband is like insane for keto right now, and I tried it and I gained 19 pounds. So one thing about keto, nutritional ketosis, is that there's 10 different genes that make you not able to do ketosis and get the goals of ketosis. So I just want to make that quick point that genetically there's 10 different conditions, mostly enzyme defects, that lead to keto not working.
Correct. I mean, I think it's so important that more and more people talk about that, because some of the people right now with the strongest voices are voicing keto, and there's never a one-for-all approach, which is really why you're on the show today. I mean, you preach that as well as anyone. And the other big thing is there's a difference between quoting research, I just feel I have to go on a rant here for a second, that there's a difference between quoting research and extrapolating data down to your average person who doesn't have cancer. They don't have tumors. Well, keto can be a medical treatment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best for your average person, and certainly not for most women. Guys seem to do a little bit better on it, and there's reasons for that, of course. But when we test thyroid all the way down to TPO and reverse T3 for most women here, and the results of a very low carbohydrate diet over an extended period of time are not good. So,
right. And adrenal function, I think, often doesn't work.
And so that's where it affects me exactly the most as well. So it affects different people differently. My thyroid might not be affected, but if I go too low in carbs, it would affect then adrenal function. And of course, we're not all yogis meditating in the Himalayas where we can be relaxed all day. Most of us have stress piled on top of a diet of stress, which is keto-based. So, all right, we'll move off of keto for a moment. I know you talked about how hormones is one of those major culprits, but it looks like, at least the list that I'm looking at right now, adding body fat, sitting too much, losing muscle. We have Dr. Wayne Westcott, who did a lot of that research of the 5 pounds per decade. 5 pounds, per decade of muscle mass right here in Massachusetts. An amazing guy who did a lot of that research. Sleeping less. It looks at all these lifestyle factors would actually increase cortisol, but before, of course, it crashes, decrease DHEA and increase estrogen while decreasing progesterone as well. So it looks like it is hormone-based, but there might be another layer to that, which is lifestyle, of course.
There's definitely another layer. Hormones are so important. And, I told you the story about being 35 and going to see my primary care doc and my hormones being out of whack. It took me a few months to get my hormones back on track again. So I was in a state of relative hormone balance when I was 44 and tested my telomeres. So hormones were an important foundation. They helped me get to, a better body weight, but they weren't enough to slow down the aging process. So as I was looking at, kind of this 20-year gap on how fast I was aging, I had to look at, okay, I sat too much when I wrote my first book. I was seeing patients during the day, and then I would go home and I would write after dinner. And that means sitting most of the day and then sitting at night. And so I was definitely sitting too much. And it kind of crept up into my life in a way that flew beneath the radar. So sitting too much is the new smoking. I feel like maybe we should both stand up as we talk about this. It's been associated very strongly with an increased risk of diabetes. It screws up your blood sugar, which is one of the most important levers when it comes to the aging process, and something that I have a lot of vulnerability with. And it increases your risk of depression. So there's a number of different problems. It basically makes you fat and dumb. So inflammation, I think, is one of the consequences of sitting too much. And in most of the studies, they look at people who sit for less than 3 hours a day versus people who sit 3 to 6 hours versus more. And so I try to sit as little as possible now. So I'll give a few quick workarounds for people who have problems with this. What I did when I got this telomere result is I bought a stand-up desk. And then I liked it so much that I got a treadmill desk. And I wrote this book younger on my treadmill desk. I did about 2,500 miles. And it's amazing to me how much better I feel. I have certain genes that allow me to control my blood sugar and control my blood pressure very well with exercise, but it's not, going to CrossFit. It's actually long, slow endurance exercise. That is the best for my genotype. So the treadmill desk kind of allows me to do that. I also regularly walk in nature. It turns out that about 15 to 20 minutes of walking in a forest helps to regulate your cortisol levels, which might be good for your MR gene. And going to Hawaii, that's such a good thing for...
There's a reason for that. That's correct.
That's right. It reduces inflammation pretty dramatically. So there's all these workarounds, and we can talk more about, the other levers that I changed. But I think these kind of top 10 things that accelerate the aging process are important to keep in mind so that you can kind of look at this menu and say, oh, I do that. I do that. I do that. Let me cut those out.
Right. And I think this is really important, whether you're suffering right now from a wellness-based issue, weight loss issue, or you're looking to, age with a better quality of life, is how I like to say it. It'd be great if we could all live to 90, 100 years old. but only, of course, if we can do that with good health. Nobody wants to be decrepit or, really overweight, because again, it's not about vanity when we talk about weight. What we're really talking about is the stress that your body is under and the increased estrogen it's producing and everything else that goes along with increased adipose tissue. So for me, it's a public service announcement about not really saying that there's a right body weight, but what there is there's health. And you're not going to get health just by looking at your blood work each year. That is a place to start. It's a prerequisite. But you also have to look at maybe a saliva-based hormone test or other hormone-based testing, is to look at, yes, your blood work with thyroid, but just don't look at TSH. And don't let your TSH be 4 or 5 and think that it's still okay, because it's not. So I think these are great things that we're chatting about today. But so we've kind of talked about like a big top 10, which I think is fantastic, because like you said, if you're kind of checking off, okay, yeah, I have 8 out of 10 of those, well, don't wait until something bad does happen. Start now, because you're getting there. You're moving in that right direction or wrong direction. But now let's move in the right direction. What are the top 10 things, just a kind of a few pages before in your book, that you've seen or you've studied or researched from other cultures that are doing things correctly, that seem to be aging well and living a longer, healthier life?
I like the island of Icaria. So it's a place in Greece where people live incredibly long. They have the largest number of people in their hundreds in the world. And the New York Times even dubbed this island as the place where people forgot to die. And I agree with what you're saying. The whole point here is to lengthen health span, not to lengthen disease span. I don't want to live to my 20s and into my hundreds with a walker and unable to recognize my children and grandchildren when they come to visit. I want to be, the way I feel now in middle age, I want to feel like I'm in my prime and extend that as long as possible. So in Icaria, they do that. One of the things they do is they don't wear watches. They have a very relaxed sense of time. They drink this mountain brew that I think is really intriguing. They have a lot of wild herbs on this island of Icaria. And these teas that they drink, which they drink as a tonic every night, act as adaptogens. So things like marjoram and rosemary and dandelion greens, they also, as you know, help with liver detoxification. They don't really consider retirement. People just kind of continue working. There's lots of people who run wineries, and of course their wine is organic. They eat wild greens every day. They have a lot of fresh fish and tons of vegetables. They drink raw, unpastured goat milk. They walk everywhere. So their island is kind of hilly and mountainous, and there aren't people with walkers going down the sidewalk. They walk well into their 90s and hundreds all over their island, visiting other people. They're very social folks. They also take a nap every day, which I never used to be a napper. I think it's something about the medical training that just kind of gets you to, I don't know, dismiss sleep and not realize how important it is. But I've since become a napper. I'm a big fan of a siesta culture and kind of bringing the siesta back. And there's even data, when I went through my medical training, I was taught that taking a nap disrupts your sleep hygiene, meaning that it can screw up your sleep at night if you take a nap during the day. And that's been totally disproven. It turns out that taking a 20 to 30-minute nap actually counts as twice the amount of sleep that you get at night. So it can be very powerful to take a nap. So those are some of the things that folks do. I think this social connection is such an important part, and also having vision and purpose. I think it's just part of the psychological pieces that really help to create integration and wholeness, so that we're not just, looking for a supplement to solve our problem instead of a pharmaceutical. We need to have kind of this whole integrated picture.
I think that's great. And that really, when you talk about this older type of community where it's almost like time has forgotten them, meaning we're always, what's the best iPhone? What's the best technology? What's the best, let's move towards blue blockers and those types of things so we can just work longer, where that's not the point. The point is actually, maybe we can use the best of technology, but we can't forget, again, that we are a part of nature and that we have certain rhythms to our body. And what you're really talking about is really working in tune with nature, is using those rhythms and trying to keep stress down. I think, kind of in a roundabout type of way, we've been dancing around stress and how stress is one of those things where it's almost hard to be sick. without stress somewhere in that picture. Now, the
Totally.
stress can be endogenous, right? It can come from candida overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth, other types of toxins, heavy metals. But a lot of it is psychological based on how our psychology affects our physiology and affects our genes. And with all of these blue zone type cultures, everything seems to be about purpose, community, activism, enjoying a meal. So it's like, even if you're not eating the best foods, which they seem to be, but you're doing it in a way where you're relaxed. Your digestion is stronger. The food's not going to ferment as much. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's just kind of like we need to step back a little bit in time to when things were a little slower, a little calmer.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I feel like stress is the elephant in the room. It's the thing that we can never talk enough about it. And, I think as natural health practitioners, I imagine you feel this way as well. It is at the root of every hormone imbalance that I see. It is at the root of every person that I see with telomeres that show that they're aging too fast. It's at the root of accelerated aging. It's at the root of 95% of disease. It's hard for me to even find diseases where stress doesn't play a role. And I think part of the problem is that people have become kind of inured or immune to a conversation about stress. But the truth is we can have great specificity about your stress system. Just talking about my own stress system, I had a failure state with how I was responding to stress. And the way that I measured that was with my telomeres. Sure. It wasn't the only test, but at the same time, my blood sugar was out of whack. I had a fasting blood sugar of about 105. And that's not good for you if you want to slow down your aging process, if you want to dance with your grandchildren at their wedding. Like, blood sugar tends to climb as you get older, and it especially climbs if you're under a fair amount of perceived stress. So yes, I totally agree with you that stress is kind of the through line for this entire conversation. Right. And I just want to challenge our listeners to get really specific about how you're managing your stress. Like, you may have this sense that you're doing pretty well. I used to think that I was pretty stress resilient until I started objectively measuring it. And I realized I wasn't doing as well as I thought.
I agree. I think that's why it is nice to have a independent cold data test that just shows you point blank, this is where you're at, whether it's telomere testing, whether it is your cortisol testing, whether it's simply something like even a hair tissue mineral analysis. If that's the least expensive route, then use it, but do something to show you where you're at currently. But I also like it because it gives you a baseline. Because everything can be improved. Telomere length can be improved. Mitochondrial biogenesis can take place. If you're at a couple hundred mitochondria, well, you can get it back up to double that. And so we can do all of these things, but you don't know where to start if you haven't started lab testing yet, if you haven't done something. So beyond lab tests, because we know that people can find their local functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, whoever it might be that they trust and rely upon. But let's do some takeaways. Like, what are one or two things? Now, I know, let's put stress aside just for a minute, because stress is dealt with different people in different ways. I like to go for a walk during lunch. That's how I break up my two halves of the day. It's like when I start to walk, I flip the switch and I breathe, my phone's away and I'm relaxing. I might be listening to some like low beta wave. I might be listening to theta. I might be listening to just a fun podcast that puts me in a good mood, but it flips the switch. And I think everybody's defined what that is. Maybe it's an Epsom salt bath. Maybe it's, again, we have forest therapy now. They're calling it therapy, which for me is great therapy. But so everyone's going to find their way. Music, dancing. What are some takeaways that we can use, functional medicine based or lifestyle based, that you've seen really work well in your practice?
So I like to start with what you put in your mouth. And we've talked a bit about food. I think we could probably do a whole podcast just talking about food. So I'm going to defer to the book for some of the specifics. I'll give one quick highlight. Grains can really be inflammatory for so many people. I recently had the experience of being off of grains for a few years and adding them back in, and I promptly gained 7 pounds in a month. I didn't change anything else with my food plan. And what I realized is that I think it's probably my mold sensitivity. So I have a gene that makes me sensitive to mold. About 1 in 4 Americans has this gene. And I believe it's the mold in grains that created more inflammation in my body, and then increased water weight, inflammatory water weight, and then a greater weight. So some of the takeaways are low or no grains. And that's been shown also to help reverse Alzheimer's disease and prevent Alzheimer's disease. A second thing is to really take care of the microbiome in your mouth. So flossing twice a day has been shown to pretty significantly improve your health span. It also has been shown that oil pulling can help you adjust the microbiome. So I usually recommend a tablespoon of either coconut oil, which is what I prefer, or sesame oil. You swish it around for 5 minutes. I actually get on my treadmill desk and swish it around for about 20 minutes. Don't spit it in your sink because it can clog your sink. Spit it in your trash can. Another thing that is really helpful, we talk a lot about exposures and some of the toxins in the environment that can accelerate aging, disrupt estrogen, thyroid, insulin, leptin, etc. And it's easy to kind of get full of doom and gloom, but there's also exposures that can be very good for you, like the sauna. And there was an incredibly exciting study that came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2015 showing that taking a sauna 4 times a week for 20 minutes was associated with a 40% reduction in mortality. 40%! They followed these middle-aged men for 20 years, and it's a kind of study that you can only do in Finland. But saunas are, I think, so good for the body. They really help with detoxification. You and I are, like doctor detoxification. So I'm a big fan of saunas. And then sleep. I have a gene, the clock gene, that makes it impossible for me to lose weight if I'm not sleeping 8 hours or so per night. And so this clock gene basically screws up some of my hormones like leptin and ghrelin if I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep at night. So that becomes non-negotiable for me. You also want your vitamin D level to be ideally between 60 and 90 for optimal sleep because it has direct and indirect effects. And it's been shown to be helpful for telomere length. So those are a few takeaways.
Those are great, really great ones. And I didn't expect all those to come out. So that's excellent. And I love when we do talk about, those are all very doable things. Like you didn't mention anything there that costs a significant amount of money. Like even a sauna. So we have a sauna here in Boston, but most wellness centers, you can buy a package and the package takes it down to a very reasonable price. But also if you're going to use a sauna quite a bit, you can get one for your home. And they make single unit ones that are small enough. And if you're really dedicated, which I know a lot of people that I work with ended up going that route, are easy to do. Vitamin D, it's one of the least expensive nutritional supplements. Now, if you can get it from the sun while not burning, even better. But those are great tips. So I'm holding up your book right here. And obviously, we're going to link up to it in today's show notes. So I'll put the link right below this video, right below this podcast as well. It is Dr. Sara Gottfried. Her book is Younger. I encourage everyone to go out, purchase this book, really digest the material, take your time reading through it, start to understand it, and then understand that this plan right here in this book, the knowledge is written in a way so that you can personalize it in your own life. And I think that's really what we're talking about, is personalized medicine. Not everyone is going to have the genes that you have, but it's nice that you figured out what you have to focus on. You don't have to focus on everything. You need to focus on these specific things like blood sugar, maybe estrogen levels, and weight. That's kind of like your thing. Where my thing might be nervous system based, a lot of other things as well, detoxification, methylation. But that's what I have to focus on, and maybe I don't have to focus on some of these other areas. So what it is it's a journey. I think it's getting to know yourself, getting to know your body, and this book, Younger, I think can help you on that path as well. So Dr. Sara, how can we find out more about you and maybe some websites, social media that we can find you at?
Well, the best place to find me is saragottfriedmd.com. That's kind of the mothership website. If you buy the book and you want to get some bonuses, you can go to theyoungerbook.com. And can I just finish with my last telomere test? Because I think that's maybe give people a sense of hope about changing these things.
I'd love to hear that because I haven't heard it myself.
Yeah, so last year at age 49, I tested again. And this was after developing the Younger protocol. It's a 7-week protocol, and then following it really carefully for 7 weeks. And my telomere test at 49 showed that I had the telomeres of a 52-year-old woman. So I closed the gap by 17 years. And we also took a group of 1,000 people through the Younger protocol. We did this last year, kind of a beta test of the protocol. And on average, they added 10 years to their health span. So this isn't just a functional medicine protocol that I came up with and didn't test. It's really important to me to prove that these things work, that they really make a difference regardless of what your genetics are. And I have an appendix in the back of the book that goes through all the different genes that I talk about in the book, telling you specifically the lifestyle tweaks that are proven to move the needle when it comes to the expression of your DNA.
I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of our listeners. So once again, I do appreciate you coming on the Cabral Concept. Thank you very much for all of your knowledge and also all the good that you are doing in the world. Thank you again.
Thanks, Dr. Cabral.
Thank you for just tuning in to another Cabral Concept. As a valued listener, during the month of April, I'd like to send you one of the exclusive online personal training workout packages I've created for my private clients all around the world. They're literally the same travel and bodyweight workouts I create for celebrities, athletes, and executive CEOs to stay in shape whether at home, in the gym, or on the road. Plus, I also want to ship you the same exact 5-piece resistance band set I send them as well. They're also the same bands I use at my home and when traveling. You cannot buy this online band workout package anywhere else. The home and travel band exercise set with the online workout is only available exclusively through the StephenCabral.com/store and is yours free of charge when you purchase any functional medicine lab test. You can choose from any of our popular food sensitivity tests, organic acid test, hair tissue mineral analysis, adrenal and hormone, thyroid, weight loss testing, vitamin D, inflammation, parasite, genetic testing, the toxicity test, and many more. We mail all labs to you in the US, Canada, and the UK, and each one of these labs can be done right at home with a simple urine, hair, stool, finger poke, or saliva sample. You'll get your results in just a few weeks after mailing in your at-home lab test, and we even provide a complimentary health coaching phone consultation with most lab kit packages. To put functional medicine to work for you and find the underlying root causes keeping you from total body health and wellness, I can't recommend lab testing enough. Plus, as a bonus this month, you'll be getting my resistance band package with the online workout to do right at home, at the gym, or when traveling. Just go to StephenCabral.com/store for details and to get yours today.